There you go.
Okay, so I'm Quinn, this is Dylan, and we're going to be pitching Comcast as a buy. So during our screener, what we looked for was companies that were diversified in diversified entertainment, where they have revenue streams from multiple areas. And what we ended up with for Comcast, it's actually diversified communications, but they are active in entertainment and media. So we got what we were looking for in terms of diversification. And the reason we wanted that is just to allow for stability. By having different, income streams, it'll be more stable during whatever period of business cycle we're in. And so we'll have, a good, healthy balance between stability and growth. And then this also allows for high potential for vertical integration, which is what we were looking for. So our recommendation, is to buy, and our reasoning here is Comcast does have diversified revenue streams, which again allows high stability, and it's a very good value at this point in time. We believe it's undervalued, and we're not pitching this as a growth stock, but it has shown growth in recent years, so that's always just a bonus. So for our valuation, let's see. Currently, it's at $41.70, and our target price was $61.60 or $61.06. Sorry. So we only gave 20% to our dividend discount model, and this is because their dividend yield was just sort of average. It's not super substantial, and while they do have a history of paying dividends, that's never guaranteed. So we didn't want to put too much weight on their ability or their likelihood to pay dividends. And then we used FCFE instead of FCFF because they do have some variation in their long-term debt just due to acquisitions that they've been going through in recent years. And then our relative valuation, we used the PE. And our assumptions in conducting this valuation, for the most part, we just sort of followed the whatever was their trend showed. But some key assumptions here are that the revenue is going to continue to grow as it has been, although it's going to reduce slightly. They've had a good amount of growth in the last year, so we assume there's going to continue to be positive, but maybe not quite as much. And then they're also going to likely continue repurchasing stock. They began their program a few years ago with like $12 billion, I think, available for stock repurchase, and they still have $2 billion left. So they'll probably continue to repurchase stock periodically. And we hope that they continue to pay down long-term debt. Over the last year, they've reduced their long-term debt substantially, but they also just went through an acquisition of a streaming service called Zumo. And they haven't disclosed the purchase amount, so we may see an increase in long-term debt. We'll see.
Okay, so what Comcast is, they're an American telecommunications, media, and entertainment conglomerate. They operate under the communications services sector, and the industries are telecommunications and media and entertainment. And then the main segments that they operate under are cable communications, so that's like broadband cable and internet, cable networks, which is like TV channels, and then they have broadcast television, which is like news and sporting events. And then they have filmed entertainment, which is Universal Studios, theme parks, which is also, a different side of Universal Studios. And then they have Sky Media, which is the biggest media and entertainment company in Europe. And these are some of the main highlights. They're the largest internet and cable provider in the United States, and they have been for quite some time. They're the second largest broadcast and cable television company in the world. They're the parent company of Universal Studios, NBC, and all of NBC's other channels. They have DreamWorks, USA Network, Sci-Fi. Those are just some of the big ones, but there's a whole list of them. They're the owner of Xfinity Cable, which is cable, internet, telephones for houses and businesses, and they also have cell phones. And as we mentioned, the parent company of Sky Limited, which biggest media and entertainment in Europe. And over half the homes in the United States subscribe to at least one Comcast service. So that just kind of shows how widespread their reach is within the U.S. So this here is their stock performance over the past 5 years. Comcast is the darker blue, and then the light blue is the S&P 500, and then the purple one is Disney, which is currently the only entertainment stock that we have in the portfolio. And this just shows kind of how they've performed. If you see, compared to the S&P 500, for the most part, they've either been above it or on par with it. You'll see kind of a dip right over here, and that was in 2018, which was when they acquired Sky. And Sky was a $40 billion acquisition, so it was pretty giant, and at that time there was some uncertainty over if Comcast was going to work out. But it ended up paying off. Their stocks come up, aside from this last week with the coronavirus, but other than that, they've performed pretty well. This is just kind of a more basic one, but just in general, it just kind of shows the trend of their stock going up. You see in 2018, as I mentioned, that was when there was some uncertainty, but they've been steadily on the rise over the last 5 years. So. And then this just kind of breaks down how they operate their business. They have two major segments. There's Comcast Cable, which is cable communications and mostly broadband internet. And then they have NBC Universal, which is the cable TV channels, the broadcast television, the movies, and the theme parks. This here, I know this is kind of a busy graphic, so I'll just try to explain it real quick. This breaks down their three main business segments, excluding theme parks and Sky. But out of their three main ones, it shows what they do, and then on the right it shows who the main customers are for these types of services. So cable communications, that's mostly internet but also cable, and that's going to be for like residential homes and businesses. And then you have their cable TV channels and their broadcast television, like their news, their sports, and other special events. And the main customers for these types of services are going to be multi-channel video providers and video on-demand services that pay them for the rights to their content. And then advertisers is where the bulk of the money comes from outside of it. And this here breaks down their revenue in 2019 by the segments. So this was something that we really liked because they get over half their revenue from cable communications, which is mostly internet. It's cable too, but internet is their big seller. That's where they get most of their money, and we like that because it gives them like a big, a strong financial base. It's they start with the internet, and then whatever money they make, they can spend kind of expanding on these other segments. So, and then this right here shows their broadband internet subscribers by year. They've grown every single year, and this graph stops in 2018, but in 2019 it grew again. So not only do they have steady income from internet, but they've been able to grow their subscriptions every single year, at least since 2009. So, and then this right here is the United States broadband internet subscribers by quarter, and this is all companies that provide internet, or at least all the big ones. And Comcast is in the blue here at the bottom, and they've been #1 for many years, and they've actually seen growth in their internet subscriptions for 35 consecutive quarters. So that's kind of reflected in this graph here. And the one thing that might be like slightly concerning is you see this other company coming in right here, that's Charter. and they've been spending like massive amounts of money to try to become major competitors in the industry. But the thing is that it hasn't affected Comcast at all, because overall internet subscribers in the United States have been steadily on the rise. So despite having that competition, Comcast has still been able to grow their subscriptions.
And that's organic growth?
What do you mean as far as?
Are they growing through acquisitions, or are they just naturally?
It's a little bit of both. Like, they're expanding their services into different areas, but also just in general, it's like internet has just been growing in the United States.
So they're not mainly growing by buying out companies?
Most of their acquisitions aren't in their internet provider realm. It's more like streaming services and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
What they've been acquiring mostly.
And this right here is just showing their revenue growth over the past 3 years. Down here, it shows their income. It looks like it drops a little bit, but in reality, 2017 was a historic year. So if this went back further, their income was consistently like below 10 billion. So the income's been pretty solid, and this revenue here was way more than they expected, but they're expecting even that to go up in the coming years. So yeah, revenue growth has been solid. And this right here is just some of the key financials that we pulled from our relative valuation. This right here on the right is the financials, the average of like their 6 top competitors, and this is Comcast here. And so these are some of the ones that we liked. Just market cap in general just shows basically like the sheer size, and basically just shows that they're major players in the industry. Like they have some weight to them. And then the debt to equity ratio, it's a little high compared to like other companies in the S&P 500, but that's pretty standard for this type of industry because they're constantly spending a lot of money and investing a lot of capital. So compared to their competitors, they're actually a little bit lower, which is good. So those kind of go with the stability we were looking for. And then these last 3, revenue, income, and EPS growth over the last 3 years, have been steadily on the rise, and they're also growing at rates higher than their competitors. So that was something that we thought was attractive. And then their strategy, we already touched on some of these things, but just to reiterate, they focus on diversifying their revenue sources, so it kind of helps them to be a little bit less volatile than some of their competitors. And they emphasize broadband internet over wireless 5G. There's been like a trend of people using 5G internet, but they're doubling down on broadband, and they're consistently growing their high-speed services. They're expanding into new areas. They're trying to become more efficient and faster with their internet speeds, so that's something that they really focus on. And then at the same time, they're always focusing on adding new things to their other business segments. Quinn will get into this in a minute, but they're always looking to add new theme parks. There's a new one opening this year. They're opening a streaming service this year. It comes out in April, so they're going to jump into that market. And they're always looking to acquire different things in the entertainment industry. Cybersecurity is a big deal with internet. They're like on the cutting edge of all that technology, and that's something that they really prioritize. So, yeah.
Alright, so I'll just go into some catalysts and just sort of general news that's happening in this area. Big one is the 2020 Summer Olympics coming up, and that's closely tied with the coronavirus right now. People are concerned that because of the coronavirus, the Olympics are going to be canceled, and this is relevant for Comcast because NBC has they're the ones that will broadcast for all of the U.S. It's predicted to bring in about $1 billion in revenue, so it's kind of a big deal for them. So, assuming that the coronavirus is resolved, it's going to bring up their stock price. So a lot of media companies have seen a huge dip in the last couple of days just because of this coronavirus scare, and So most will come up once it's resolved, and we assume it will be resolved somewhat soon. And then the elections are another big one. There's just going to be an increase in people using these or watching these networks for that, and continued. So there's been a transition from cable to streaming-based TV watching, and this might appear to be kind of bad for Comcast, but it's actually beneficial for them because they also provide high-speed internet, and their margins actually are better for providing broadband internet as opposed to providing cable. So it's and they've obviously been increasing their users consistently year after year. So that's going to help with them. And then on top of that, they also have several streaming services available or coming soon. Peacock is being released some like in the summer, July, I believe. They have also just purchased Zumo, as I mentioned earlier, and Zumo is one that comes on a lot of different smart TVs that are available for purchase. It just comes automatically downloaded on those. And then Vudu is a very popular one too. That they're in discussions with Walmart, working out a deal to purchase that. So that could be huge. And then of course, from Universal, they have a bunch of big name movies coming out soon that are probably gonna bump up their revenues, Fast and Furious and things like that. And then in Japan, their Universal Studios in Japan, they're opening up a new segment of the park. It's Super Nintendo World. That's expected to be a big deal for everyone there. And then we'll go on to risks. So one of the big ones is 5G. So the CEO of Comcast has talked a little bit about this, and they're not very worried about 5G, just because no matter what, cable connection is always going to be faster than wireless, and even if 5G is able to match the speeds of current fiber optic, internet providers, they'll likely be able to increase their speeds that they offer. And Comcast has one of the largest fiber optic networks in the U.S. They have like hundreds of thousands of miles of fiber optic, so it's not a huge concern for them. And then also, 5G is important for people that are like to have mobile only, wireless only service, but most people will choose to have in-home Wi-Fi, broadband, as well as a mobile service. So it's not a huge concern. And then, of course, streaming services, talked about that. They already, they're combating that with their broadband sales and their streaming services that they're releasing. And then the coronavirus, again, is that's causing a pretty big tank in their stock price right now, but that's likely, well, maybe not. We assume it's going to be resolved. Hopefully it just turns out to be a flu. And then for our purchase recommendation, so what we currently have in our holdings, our companies are pretty good. Disney, Google, two types of Google, and then TechTarget. They've performed fairly well. And then, but we obviously have a fair amount of cash available. Here we put 48,000. Apparently, it's a lot more than that. But as for comparing our communication segment companies to what the S&P holds, we're a little bit lagging. So that S&P is 10.5%, comprised of communication sector companies, and currently our holdings are only at 8.1%. So we believe we're in a strong position to add another company to these holdings. and we have cash available to make that purchase. So we aren't recommending selling what we currently have. We don't think it's necessary. We think we could just use cash and make a purchase on Comcast.
So is Comcast different enough from Disney that you think both add value in our portfolio?
We believe so because their primary revenue source is from their broadband internet services.
So then why not buy Charter, which is
Yeah.
all broadband and internet and none of the other?
Well, what we like about Comcast is they kind of get to do a little bit of both. They have their toes in they have one foot in the internet and then one in the entertainment. So we like the diversity, and then also the one thing about Charter that worries me is that they've spent so much money and they've had negative incomes, and their PE ratio is just crazy high. It's like, I want to say 75, 80. And so I think it might be a little bit overvalued, personally.
So it's not really diversifying if they're doing the same thing as Disney with half their business and competing for the same market share, is it? It just sounds like Disney with internet, and we already own Disney. Like, are they competing for the same market share as Disney?
I suppose in their entertainment and media segments, they are competing for the same market share. They're obvious. I mean, they do still find a good amount of revenue in that market share, though. And I guess our deal with the diversification of their revenues is that so like their theme parks, those tend to be very seasonal. So we get that the high income during summer months and then lower income during the winter, and that kind of can be balanced with their steady income from their internet. So they are competing for the same market share, but we believe it's almost an advantage.
So one of the ways I think about diversification, I can either buy a diversified company, stock in a diversified company, and they kind of pick and choose for me. Or as an investor, I can choose diversification by maybe choosing a company that like, for example, Charter that only does one thing, but then also finding a Disney and cobbling together a portfolio that looks a lot like what Comcast does, but not all in one company, right? So is there what's called economies of scope? So you guys probably know the phrase economies of scale. Economies of scope is when you get benefit by doing multiple things. Is there economies of scope by having it all under one roof? So I want you guys to think about that question maybe for next time and come back with an answer on that one. A couple other things I want you to think about, because this is an industry that is rapidly changing and faces some interesting kind of dynamics. You guys talked about 5G, but what about Next Gen TV, which is a new broadcasting standard, and that would affect their broadcast business? Net neutrality. It seems to be put to rest for now, but likely with a new political administration at some point it will come up again. So how do they fare if there are changes in the regulations around net neutrality? Would they benefit? Would they not? So do a little digging on those two kind of possible external kind of things that might impact them. What markets do they serve with their broadband business, and are they typically the only provider in the region?
You know, I had a map of that I definitely should have put on there, so I'd have to look at that to give you an accurate answer.
From my understanding, a lot of places they're now starting to face some competition. For a long time, they would be like a monopoly or one of maybe two providers in local markets, because broadband does actually take physical infrastructure to deliver broadband, right? So like it's hard to support like 10 different competitors in a market. You usually have just a couple that are capable of laying infrastructure. So they ended up in many places being almost like a monopoly or a duopoly. And so they make great revenue, but customers didn't really care for them, because when you're a monopoly, you maybe don't have great incentives to serve your customer, go above and beyond for your customers. So now that they have Charter encroaching on a lot of their territory, it would be kind of interesting to see if they've improved their customer service or changed their pricing. So another thing to think So Sky is primarily overseas. Do you see them growing overseas, or are they primarily US? What do you think their geographic strategy will be going forward?
I have to look more into that. I know right now they're big in the UK, Germany, Italy. It's like 5 of the real big European countries, but I didn't read much about it, how, like, if they're trying to expand it. I would imagine it would be in Europe to other countries, but it'd be something we have to look into.
And then my last question will be, like with their Peacock streaming service, what do you guys think about these like unbundled streaming services, right? So there was a model for a long time that you got a cable package and you got kind of everything. A lot of cord cutting, so now people like buying Netflix instead, Hulu. Now a lot of networks are trying to break out their individual offerings instead of being in a platform or kind of under a platform like say a Hulu as like their own like NBC Universal streaming service. Do you think consumers have a tolerance to buy like 8 of these streaming services? If they're only going to buy 1 or 2, is this going to be one of the top ones?
No, I think most people are going to pay for maybe 1 or 2 different services and then likely use others that are, use the Hulu model of, you know, like they'll be free with ads and then maybe there's a premium that you can pay for. And that's what Peacock is set to be, is it'll be paid for with advertisements, and then there's I think there's going to be a premium option as well. And they also obviously just purchased another streaming service that uses that model as well. I think that's probably their safest bet, because people are probably going to continue to pay for Netflix and maybe one other one that they prefer, and then if a show comes on that they would like to see on another platform, they'll use the free ones that just add advertising.
So this will be a case of advertising versus subscription business models, and see how it
And one
goes.
thing that we're kind of hoping on, they're going to have a ton of exclusive Olympics content on there. So at
If
least
the Olympics happen.
yeah, at least that'll be good for this year. But if it happens, and then they're already coming in with like a big library of shows like The Office and Friends, and they're going to be making their own custom shows with like Universal Studios. So we're hoping that they can come in and deliver a product that's, I mean, it sounds good, but we'll see what happens.
And for the long term, like Disney is pretty well positioned to start bundling. I'm not sure exactly what Sky is, but does Sky have any services that like, or any of their own content that they own that they would be able to include with, what was it called? Peacock, yeah, but to be able to include with that, like, just for looking forward, are they going to be able to compete with somebody like Disney?
As far as I know, Sky doesn't create content. They're mostly like a broadcast network.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, that is a good point.
Sky used to have like a lot of broadcast rights for like FIFA and a lot of soccer, which, given the markets that they serve, was a big hook for them. That was important. So you might want to look into that. Other questions?
So you mentioned, I mean, clearly they're somewhat vertically integrated. Have they faced any kind of legal issues in the past, or are they expecting to face any kind of legal issues, acquisitions, mergers, vertical integration stuff?
There was a few like lawsuits and stuff we read about, but there was nothing super significant that was like had a major impact that I saw.
Are you talking about like antitrust kind of stuff, or
Right.
or just in general? Yeah, I think so. Not that I'm aware of at the moment, but I'm pretty sure for vertical, you're much more safe from antitrust law, infringement or whatever. It's when you're going and doing horizontal,
Right.
integration where you run into issues with that. And they're not a monopoly, I would say, so I don't think it's really super concerned.
Any other questions?
I might have one. So, a lot of people like to, in the past, because they're one of the two, like, big internet providers in the area, like to complain about how slow their internet is with whoever their provider is. Do you know what the difference of quality between Comcast is and like Charter? Because Charter's kind of the new kid on the block, from what it seems. Is there like a big difference between the quality of speed and connection between the two, or are they roughly similar, or is?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any huge differences in the quality. I think as long as it's, you know, coming from a cable, it's gonna be pretty similar. But we can definitely look into that more.
Yeah, we can look into it more, but I know that they're, from what I've read, they're really competitive with them in the areas that they're both there, so I imagine they're trying to at least match the speed and quality as best they can, but we can look into that more, for sure.
For like the future of Wi-Fi, you guys had the graph up there. Is the market growing in the U.S. or is it decreasing
For
Wi-Fi?
the broadband.
Yeah,
internet,
broadband.
It's
Yeah.
been growing, yeah.
It is growing?
Really going
Okay.
up for sure,
Okay.
like big time.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think it's going to continue growing? Because I know at least with like my service provider, I'll pay $10 more a month, and then I have like unlimited data. I don't need Wi-Fi. Do you think
Yeah.
as we're moving forward, do you think it's going to phase out at all? I'm not really a tech guy.
So I think that comes down to like so people are always gonna need connection to the internet, so it comes down to the 5G thing, where, you know, people are able to get as fast of a connection from their wireless provider as their Wi-Fi, and why would they need it? But the thing with 5G is, it's, from what I understand, it's still gonna require fiber optic connections. So it's gonna be years before people in more rural areas are actually able to use 5G. But as those speeds become more standard, so, you know, 5G is going to large cities first. That's gonna I think that's gonna standardize a certain speed, and then it's gonna actually increase demand for Wi-Fi in other places that can't get 5G yet, and where they'll be able to achieve that same speed. So I think it is going to grow, and I don't think any wireless provider is going to be able to outmatch what they can offer with their Wi-Fi.
Another thing currently with 5G is that the data caps are much lower. So like if you're into streaming, downloading, gaming, whatever it may be, 5G, at least right now, it's not a great option. So.
And another thing is businesses and large institutions can't operate entirely off of wireless.
Yeah, but like, what percentage of the revenue is big business? Okay.
So it's probably worth thinking about technologies, not just 5G, that might compete with broadband. And that's more of like a longer term perspective. But like, how do people get internet service? If it's not broadband, it's satellite based. Those are kind of like the big technologies now. But there's always the idea of like leapfrogging a generation. It may not be something that's like around the corner tomorrow, but it might be further. So the markets they serve, primarily urban places, not the rural areas without access to broadband. So like, think about that. With 5G, you actually need like a 5G enabled device as well for that to work. I was actually reading very interestingly about how there's like two standards for 5G. So if you're in like a stadium that has special 5G equipment, then you actually do get all the benefits of 5G. But for most people, even if you have a 5G enabled device, like, you will not get all the speed and wonderful things, like the lack of latency and all those things for some time. So I guess maybe an overall snapshot of technologies in this space, and kind of what's coming down the pipeline sooner rather than later might be a good addition to this presentation. Put some ideas. There we go. Okie doke. So guys, Thursday